You're fired. That's what my son told me after I spent 20 years and my retirement saving his empire. The humiliation echoed 47 stories above Chicago, but I walked out with one document in my briefcase. By Monday, his glass tower would shatter. What was in those pages that even he couldn't survive? Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. If you love stories like this, subscribe. Tomorrow brings another you won't want to miss. Lake Michigan throws winter light across Douglas's office. The cup skids, coffee bleeds over glossy projections. A single drop lands beside the word caution. The city whispers behind sealed glass. Vents hiss. My heartbeat counts the seconds. 20 years ago, I saved this place with our retirement. Wrote a check in a kitchen that smelled like hope, and a young founder promised respect with shaking hands. Today, that promise dies in a sentence. I square the reports, breathe, and say nothing. Leave clean. I've ridden crashes, rebuilt trust, and learned the sound of numbers that lie, and leaders who lie louder. A drawer holds the proof. Between quarterly summaries, figures and notes about lifting margins and hiding debt. I lift the page, steady as a plumb line. I leave without a scene, carrying a document that will end his performance and start a federal case. In the elevator mirror, a father looks back, older than this building, steadier than its steel. Monday will be fun. I was never built for spectacle. I grew up in Abilene, learned to read balance sheets in a rail yard trailer, and carried that calm into Chicago boardrooms 1 decade at a time. My name is Columbus Grant. 40 years of numbers made me meticulous by habit and honest by design. Eleanor and I married young and stayed married because we practiced small disciplines. Tell the truth, pay the bill, show up. 42 years later, our rituals still anchor me. Coffee at 6, shoes shined, ledgers neat, a kitchen clock keeping time with a life that prefers order over noise. When Douglas called in 2008, that steadiness cracked. The phone rang after midnight. His voice was tight, a mix of pride and panic he tried to swallow. "Dad, I need help. Payroll is due Friday. Receivables are jammed. The credit line is frozen. If I miss this week, the company folds." I could hear the fluorescent buzz of his rented office and the hollow echo of too many empty desks. He was 27, burning ambition for fuel, and the economy had just pulled the rug. I told him to breathe. I told him to open his books. Eleanor tied her robe and sat across from me at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug like it held back a storm. We counted the numbers the way we always did. Savings, retirement, the little car fund we had promised ourselves. 20,000 would bridge payroll and buy credence with spooked suppliers. We both knew it. We also knew what it meant. That money was the quiet promise we had made to each. Other for our slower years. We signed the withdrawal slip anyway. I slid it across the laminate to the banker at dawn and drove straight to Douglas's office with a check and a plan. I did not stop with the check. I called 3 legacy clients who still took my calls because I had never lied to them. I vouched for the boy. His model is sound, his margins are honest, his execution is disciplined. I walked him into rooms that would have stayed closed and wrote a letter to a bank president who had coached Little League with me in '89. Extend the line. He will make good. The line reopened. Suppliers calmed. Friday came and nobody missed a paycheck. That first saved week taught him something he would repeat back to me for years. Liquidity is trust you can count. We built a decade out of those Fridays, nights bent over spreadsheets, teaching Douglas the slow math that keeps fast money honest. We sat in his office long after the last intern left and modeled worst case, not best. We walked burned scenarios and cash buffers, then ran sensitivity analysis until the printer's whir felt like a lullaby. I repeated the rules because rules hold you when the wind starts to sing lies. Transparency beats velocity. Profit is earned, not declared. Leverage is a razor, respect it or bleed. He listened. He asked hard questions. He built cash reserves that made auditors nod. The day we framed the photo from our first profitable quarter, he surprised me. He mounted it next to my old slide rule and said it was his reminder that grit wins. On his desk, the picture of his Northwestern graduation sat beside a handwritten thank you to Eleanor for believing. For a long time, those images steadied me when the market did what the market does. We turned a crisis into a company, and the company learned to walk like a grown man instead of sprinting like a reckless teenager. Then the world changed. After the pandemic, money got loud again. Slides grew shinier. Road shows replaced brown bag briefings. Early-stage founders strutted through conference halls, selling blue sky with laser pointers. Douglas began to love the shine. Decks came back with gradients and momentum verbs. Our monthly reviews spent less time in footnotes and more time on the story. He hired a head of growth who could recite market sizes to 3 decimals while skipping the ugly line items in the cash flow. It was not fraud, it was drift, the kind that starts in adjectives and ends in outcomes. I raised flags without raising my voice. Subtle slippage, I called it. Assumptions tucked into cells with no formulas. Revenue recognized a shade early. Adjustments labeled non-recurring that recurred like seasons. Nothing explosive, not yet. Just enough gloss to make me press a little harder on the pencil when I signed. He brushed it off as the new way. Investors are buying vision, Dad. We have to meet the room. I said the room always changes its mind. Covenants do not. The slippage became warning lights. Leverage. Ratios crept upward with a note about low rates sticking around. Tail risk got treated like folklore. Deferred liabilities moved backstage, a step left of the rosy EBITDA spotlight. Whenever I asked for waterfalls beneath the headline number, I got a faster story, not slower detail. Profit started to look declared rather than earned. I have seen that arc before. It begins with applause and ends with auditors. I chose a quiet line in the sand. I met with 2 board members privately and walked them through the numbers the way I had taught Douglas to do when he was 27. I did not accuse. I reconciled. Here are the adjustments. Here is the sensitivity. Here is the cash burn if one major client delays 60 days. Here is the covenant if rates jump 1 point. I brought the 2008 withdrawal slip in my folio as a reminder that this family had bled for the right to tell the truth. They listened. They thanked me. They asked for time. At home, Eleanor heard it all and heard more. She set the photo of that first profitable quarter on our mantle, a small act of prayer. She knows the cost of shortcuts. She was there when I mortgaged our house during the recession to cover payroll. She knows the look in my eyes when I trust and when I doubt. She watched me polish shoes I no longer wore and asked one question. Is the money honest? I said I did not like the answer the numbers were giving me. On my office shelf, 3 frames held our whole story. Douglas in cap and gown, beam bright. The profit quarter photo with 4 of us grinning like we had tricked gravity. And the kitchen snapshot of our hands over the 2008 slip, wedding rings catching the lamp. They were my compass when the city siren drifted up from the avenue and I felt pressure to keep up with a race I never entered. The clock ticked. The printer hummed. I kept my ledger neat. The boom brought ego in expensive shoes. Forecasts arrived without the spine of assumptions. When I insisted, the team handed me a workbook with cells locked. It looked neat. It did not show its bones. I unlocked what I could and found debt service math that pretended rates never rise, churn modeled as a rounding error, and pipelines that assumed every maybe would turn into money on schedule. That was not finance. That was hope with formatting. So I wrote a memo to the board. Calm tone, hard numbers, tail risk ignored. Leverage at a level that invites weather to become wreckage. Deferred liabilities masked by aggressive adjustments. I did not copy Douglas because I did not want spectacle. I wanted correction. The reply came back polite and thin, noted, appreciated. We value your perspective. The printer slid out my draft quietly. The clock kept time. I told Eleanor it might get loud. In my bones, I knew the old warning. If the truth is inconvenient, someone will try to remove the messenger. That is not cynicism. That is operational history. I cleaned my desk a little, not because I planned to leave, but because I have always believed you should be ready to walk through a hallway with your head up. I checked the lock on the bottom drawer, where I kept the 2008 file and 3 letters of thanks from clients who had trusted us when the river ran low. I still believed in Douglas, even then. The boy who stayed up past midnight learning cash flow discipline was still in there somewhere. But taste corrupts judgment when the applause gets easy. My line did not move. Transparency beats velocity. Profit is earned, not declared. Leverage is a razor, respect it, or bleed. Those rules had carried us across a decade. If they were suddenly unwelcome, something fundamental had shifted. And if something fundamental had shifted, the stakes were larger than pride. They were about the truth inside the numbers and the cost of forgetting who saved you when the lights almost went out. The conference room felt colder than usual, a long pane of glass throwing Lake Michigan's winter light across binders. Douglas entered without small talk, posture straight, eyes bright with the shine he'd begun to love. He took the head chair and tapped the mic built into the walnut. "I've made a decision about management restructuring," he said, voice amplified to flatten questions. "Effective Monday, Columbus Grant will no longer be working with the company." Time stalled. Margaret Chen's pen hit wood, a tiny snap that sounded like a fracture. James Morrison inhaled and held it. Patricia Williams glanced at a folder stamped HR, then passed it, as if searching for a door that wasn't there. Decks glowed on the wall behind Douglas. Bright colors, large numbers. The show still running while he cut the man who taught him the script. Columbus didn't look at the screens. He looked at his son until the silence had a shape. He stood, straightened his tie, and gathered the single legal pad he'd brought. "Good luck, son." No sarcasm, no flinch, just the phrase they used before math tests when Douglas was 13. Douglas didn't blink. "We appreciate your service," he replied in the tone of a press release. Paper rustled. Air moved again. Columbus opened the frosted glass door and stepped into the corridor where the vent rumble lived. Marble under his loafers felt colder than steel. His office door stood open. Inside, cardboard boxes were already stacked in a neat column beneath his diplomas. Someone had measured tape, labeled lids, counted frames. Dignity demanded a slower pace than anger, so he crossed the carpet like he had crossed trading floors. Measured, shoulders square, breathing even. He set the legal pad on the desk, slid the picture of Eleanor into a box, lifted Douglas's graduation photo, and paused. It had sat beside a frame from their first profitable quarter, a quiet duet. He wrapped both in tissue and placed them on top of the kitchen snapshot, where 2 rings hovered over a withdrawal slip. The bullpen printer clicked somewhere, absurd in its business-as-usual cheer. The bottom drawer resisted. He tugged. It stuck. He crouched, braced, pulled again until wood screeched and the face jerked open. Files he didn't recognize slid forward. Their tabs bore Douglas's initials. The top stack read Investor Narrative Q4. Beneath it, Draft Decks External. He glanced at the camera bubble in the ceiling corner, a polite black half-sphere reflecting his gray hair. He sat and read. Internal summaries showed one set of figures. SEC filings showed another. The differences weren't rounding errors. They were a chasm paved in adjectives. Margins inflated by timing, adjustments. Debt to equity, massaged with footnotes that moved obligations offstage. A handwritten note in Douglas's script wrote a margin. Increase profit narrative by 1 million. Emphasize trajectory. Minimize debt discussion. Another page translated that into slides, arrows up, colors warm, language soft. He flipped to a timeline mapping investor meetings across 3 weeks. pairing glossy deck with talking points that dodged covenants. His chest tightened in the familiar way his body warned when a cable began to sing. Another folder, revenue recognition, pulled forward on 2 contracts, relabeled alignment. Churn modeled as negligible, while support tickets spiked. The marbles cold reached his soles. He pulled out his phone. With hands still steady from decades of audits, he began to image each page. The faint click of the camera cut the silence into usable pieces. He angled the lens to catch handwriting, then the printed figure it sought to bend. He shot the timeline last, framed with the camera bubble above, a private joke he'd appreciate when a federal audience reviewed it. The evidence didn't shout. It accumulated, line by line, note by note, intent in ink. Steps sounded in the corridor. He slid the legal pad over the drawer's lip. Douglas filled the doorway, jacket crisp, victory warm. "Turn in the car keys by Monday," he said, like asking a temp to return a badge. Columbus nodded. "Understood. Anything else?" Douglas checked his watch. "Building locks down in 5. Don't forget to clear IT." He turned, then paused. "It's just business. You taught me that." Columbus let the sentence pass like a truck you don't step in front of. When the footsteps faded, he finished the photographs, working quickly, methodically, the way you shut down a line when a bearing screams. He returned the folders to the drawer, but not the timeline, that he slipped beneath the legal pad with the 2008 slip, a new partnership that made its own kind of sense. He lifted a box and took one long look around the office where he had taught a boy to respect a ledger. The frosted glass cast his outline into the hall, a figure older and steadier than the building's steel. He switched off the lamp and listened to the vent rumble, the muffled voices, the distant printer, city under winter light. This wasn't theater. This was record. In the elevator lobby, he pressed the button and met his reflection in the mirrored doors. A father, not a relic. A witness, not a casualty. As the doors opened, he touched his breast pocket to feel the folded pages and the old slip where 2 rings caught a kitchen lamp. This isn't creative accounting, he thought, stepping inside. This is fraud. Today. And fraud has a sound when it breaks. The first thing I did was put the numbers side by side. On my screen, the public 10Q sat open with its sober black type. Net income, 2.3 million. Margin as stated, debt to equity. Flagged with the amber caution I had insisted on last quarter. Next to it, I laid the investor deck I had found in the stuck drawer. Same quarter, same logo, different universe. A bright headline promised 3.4 million in profit, margin bars lit like sunrise, and debt collapsed into a footnote that pretended interest never comes due. I took out a highlighter and traced the deltas like fault lines. Cost of revenue shaved by operational alignment. Deferred revenue pulled forward by timing realignment. Debt service pushed to a later slide and relabeled strategic leverage. Every euphemism had a price, and the bill would arrive in the hands of people who trusted our numbers to tell the truth. Most of them would never set foot on the 47th floor. They would read a story and believe it. I thought about the couples who put their savings in careful places, the pension fund managers who sleep light, the small regional bank that renews credit based on line items and ratios. In Douglas's handwriting, the margin told its own story. Emphasize Q4 trajectory. Minimize debt equity. Smoothing language, he once called it, back when we practiced telling hard truths without cruelty. This wasn't smoothing. It was sanding off bolts until a bridge looked pretty in photographs and failed under load. If you'd tell it to your grandmother and a federal judge the same way, it's honest. My own credo came back like a plumb line. I tested it against the deck. I pictured Eleanor's mother at our kitchen table, glasses low on her nose, asking simple questions. I pictured a judge asking for the plain version. My mouth would not form the same words twice. Test failed. I capped the highlighter, wrote the totals on a yellow pad, and circled them with a slow hand to make myself feel the weight. Profit. 2.3 becomes 3.4. Debt service. Minimized, deferred, disguised. Timeline. Aggressive enough to demand adjectives. Whoever read the deck would hear velocity and mistake it for safety. I called Eleanor. She answered on the first ring, breath already held. "Well?" she asked, and the one word carried our whole life. I told her the truth, in pieces, the way you carry heavy boxes down a staircase. Public numbers here, private numbers there, his handwriting on the margins. Her silence stretched, then steadied. "It hurts," she said quietly, and then, as if the second breath had decided for her, "Do what you would want a stranger to do for us." I closed my eyes and let the sentence settle where anger had been building. I hung up and pulled out Gordon Hale's card, the one I kept behind my license. The embossing had worn smooth where my thumb landed. I dialed. "Columbus?" he said, voice level as a beam. "You wouldn't be calling if it were nothing." "It isn't nothing, Gordon." I summarized what I had: the 10Q, the internal decks, the handwriting, the dates. I told him how I found the binders and what I had photographed. "Chain of custody," he said first, because that's how he thinks. "Keep originals where they are for now. Preserve the context. Bring me copies and your notes. We'll timestamp, hash, and seal." "And anonymity?" I asked. "There are ways to protect identity at the start," he said. "But if this proceeds, testimony is likely. We can build a careful record and protect you as a witness. The question is not whether it will be painful. It's whether you can live with the alternative." The alternative was simple. Say nothing and let the teacher's fund buy an illusion. Let a community bank renew its line because the deck sang. Let couples in their 60s keep believing in bars colored like sunrise. Protect the innocent, even from your own, I said aloud, surprised by how easily the words found air. Gordon exhaled once, almost a nod through the line. "Write that exact sentence in your notes," he said. "When the wind picks up, you'll need it." I wrote it. The pen scratched. The printer fed a confirmation page from the secure drive I had created, spitting out a label with timestamps and a checksum. I slipped Gordon's card into the frame with Eleanor's photo so I wouldn't forget that courage is not a solo act. Then I opened the yellow pad again and drew 2 columns, filing and deck. Under filing, I listed net income, cost of revenue, debt service, covenant status, cash flow from operations. Under deck, I wrote the numbers that wanted to be true more than they wanted to be proved. I highlighted each variance and wrote a plain speech line beside it, the way I'd explain it to a retiree asking where their money sleeps. I added a section for marginalia, emphasized trajectory, minimized debt equity. I printed a clean copy of the 10Q and laid it under the projector light so the tiny figures stood crisp as courtroom exhibits. If you'd tell it to your grandmother and a federal judge the same way, it's honest. I said it again, not as comfort, but as a gauge. It failed again. I called Gordon back. "I'm ready to file." He didn't congratulate me. He moved to logistics. "Meet me at 7 in the morning. Bring the drive and your written notes. We'll make 2 sealed packets. We'll log them, lock one in my safe, and prepare the SEC intake. If they open a case, we'll brief you on agents' procedures and how to answer questions precisely. You will not speculate. You will not dramatize. You will testify to what you saw." "Understood," I said. He paused, then asked the only human question you can ask a father at a moment like this. "Are you steady?" "I am," I said, and I heard it land in my own chest like a keel. I hung up and returned to the numbers, not to argue with them, but to memorialize them. I dated every page. I wrote who would be harmed if the fiction traveled 1 more mile unchecked. Teachers, nurses, small-town depositors, vendors who front inventory because they believe invoices mean what they say. I wrote Douglas's name last, so I would not let blood blind me to duty. Then I set the pen down and read the credo 1 more time. If you'd tell it to your grandmother and a federal judge the same way, it's honest. This failed that test. I set my phone down and looked at the city falling into winter light. The vent whispered. Somewhere 2 floors down, a printer chattered an ordinary job, oblivious to the fact that the next print would carry weight. I put the columned page on top of the briefcase, placed the secure drive beside it, and pressed my palm flat. Steward of truth, I said quietly. Not for drama, but so my body would hear my mouth agree. I turned off the desk lamp and let the glass reflect me in the gray. I was not the wounded father now. I was the man responsible for keeping people safe from pretty numbers that lied. Monday could be fun for headlines, but the work had already started. I locked the briefcase. Then I locked the door. Gordon Hale started with the law before the emotion. In his conference room, he outlined the elements like a checklist I could hold in steady but tired hands. A material misstatement or omission tied to a securities transaction. Intent to deceive, investor reliance, and loss when truth collides with the market. He tapped my printouts. Public filing shows 2.3. Investor deck shouts 3.4. Debt minimized. Margins inflated. Handwritten notes that steer the story away from facts. That, he said, is the skeleton of securities fraud. I listened, jaw tight, because the bones were my son's handwriting. He explained the SEC whistleblower portal. We would submit a TCR, tip, complaint, or referral, with exhibits, my chronology, and a sworn declaration under penalty of perjury. The commission could open an inquiry, issue subpoenas, and coordinate with criminal authorities if they saw willful deception. If transmissions crossed state lines, the FBI would likely join. Personal risk? Retaliation is illegal, he said, but people try anyway. Protections? Anti-retaliation provisions, confidentiality where possible, and his office as my shield. You came with evidence, he said. We'll come with process. He slid an engagement form toward me. Authorize my office to file, to manage communications, to hold originals. The pen cap clicked in my fingers. I signed, printed my name, and dated each line the way I made junior analysts date ledger entries. Gordon stacked the packet, checked every tab, then handed me a short memo he gives to clients who choose the lawful path. Do not. Contact the subject. Do not tip colleagues. Preserve documents exactly as found, and let the process work. By noon, we were inside the federal building. The lobby smelled like floor wax and intention. Fluorescent lights hummed. A copier murmured behind frosted glass. Agent Sophia Ramirez met us by a secured door, badge at her hip, posture easy but exact. Mr. Grant, Mr. Hale, this way. The interview room was sterile and honest. Table, chairs, a recorder with one blinking red eye, and an HVAC hiss that made each sentence feel measured. Agent Ramirez set a stack of evidence bags on the table, each with a printed seal and chain of custody log. We will catalog, photograph, and seal each item you provide. I placed the manila folder between us and slid it forward. She noted time, date, my full name, my former role, and how I gained access. Start at the beginning, she said. I did. Public 10Q on my screen, the stuck drawer, the internal decks, the handwriting in the margins, the exact variances, the dates. She photographed each page, logged exhibit numbers, and eased the documents into clear bags. The adhesive strips made a soft rip as she peeled them, then a quiet press, as she smoothed each seal flat with the side of her hand. She had me initial the edges. Mr. Hale, please, initial as witness. The recorder blinked. Footsteps passed in the hallway. Doors opened and closed to the rhythm of federal work. When we finished the core set, she asked for my notes, the side-by-side comparison, the arithmetic. Now the rules, she said. You will not contact your son. You will not contact any colleague at the company. You will not retrieve additional materials without guidance. If they reach out to you, you will not discuss the investigation. You will refer them to counsel. Do you understand? I did. She slid her card across the table. If anyone pressures you, call me first, then your attorney. We will handle it. Gordon asked the questions I could not quite form. Timeline? Weeks, sometimes months, Ramirez said. We verify authenticity against filings and bank records, pull communications, and interview custodians. If probable cause develops, we seek warrants. If an arrest is warranted, you will hear from us the night before. Do not tell anyone. What about safety? These are white-collar matters, she said. The greatest danger is reputational pressure. Document every interaction. Do not answer provocative emails. Forward them. She clicked her pen closed and turned the recorder off. The room fell into the clean silence that follows hard truth. I signed my witness statement, ink steady, each signature beside a printed line that felt like a narrow bridge from father to citizen. Ramirez placed the sealed evidence into a locked case, noted the serial number, and initialed the log. Then she stood, shook our hands with professional gravity, and escorted us through corridors that smelled faintly of toner and new carpet. We paused in the lobby. People moved with the calm urgency of those who measure their days in procedure. I could feel grief and clarity in the same breath, like winter air that stings and cleans at once. The lawful path is slow, Gordon said, reading my face, but it holds. I nodded. The elevators chimed. A marshal walked past with a stack of blank evidence stickers. Somewhere upstairs, Eleanor would remind me to drink water and eat something and to sleep. Outside, the city sounded normal. Bus brakes, a siren far off, a delivery cart rattling over a seam in the sidewalk. Ordinary noise against an extraordinary day. I tucked Agent Ramirez's card behind my license, the manila folder now lighter because its weight had been shared. We had filed the tip, sealed the proof, and agreed to silence while the truth found its footing. Let the process work, I told myself, and for the first time since the conference room ambush, my chest loosened. On the drive home, the dashboard clock ticked in soft green numerals. My hands stayed at 10 and 2, the old habit of a cautious man. I thought of the kitchen table in 2008, the withdrawal slip with Eleanor's careful signature, the promise a younger Douglas made with wet eyes and shaking hands. I thought of the boardroom where he erased me in a sentence. Justice would not roar. It would build, brick by brick, document by document, until even a glass tower could not ignore it. We stopped at Gordon's office to set next steps. He would submit the TCR with exhibits labeled, the chronology attached, and my declaration notarized. He would send document preservation letters to prevent destruction and prepare me for quiet weeks when nothing visible happens, but everything important moves beneath the surface. He reminded me of the creed I had taught by accident. Tell the same story to your grandmother and a federal judge. That's the only story that survives. When I finally walked through our front door, Eleanor met me with a glass of water and the look that holds a man together. We sat at the dining table where we had measured out retirement dollars and faith, and I told her the rules. No contact, no hints, no speculation, only patience and notes. She took a breath, squeezed my hand, and spoke the line that made resolve feel like peace. Protect the innocent, even from your own. I wrote it at the top of my notebook. Then I slept. The weekend passed like a countdown. At home, Eleanor set 2 coffee cups side by side on the kitchen counter each morning. The small act carried weight, a quiet reminder that even in upheaval, routine could anchor us. I refilled the printer tray, ran off another set of the side-by-side comparisons, and filed them neatly in a labeled binder. Each page, each highlight, felt like ballast against the storm I knew was coming. On the wall calendar near the pantry, a square box around one word glared at me in thick ink. Monday. The letters looked heavier than all the others, as if the pen itself had known what was waiting. Saturday evening brought the IT call. Agent Sofia Ramirez's voice was calm, clipped, professional, but the words carried an undercurrent that tightened my chest. Warrants are secured. Execution window is 7 to 8 a.m. Monday morning, you stay out of contact, stay out of sight. Do not interfere. Her tone left no room for interpretation. I wrote the time in my notebook, underlined it twice, then closed the cover as if I were closing a door. When Eleanor asked, I simply said, "They're ready." She nodded, placed her hand over mine, and said, "Then so are we." Sunday moved like a long inhale. The house was still, sunlight falling in patterns across the dining table where documents once lay scattered like fallen leaves. Eleanor clipped a branch of rosemary from the garden, set it in a small jar by the window, and said, "For focus." I checked my watch more often than I should have, as though measuring time would make it yield its secrets sooner. Evening came, and with it a silence so deep it felt like the pause before thunder. I went to bed early, but sleep never settled. My body stayed tense, ready for the hour I knew would mark a shift no one could undo. Monday's dawn was gray, the kind of light that makes a city feel suspended between night and day. I parked across from the tower at 6:45, engine off, windows clear. The glass building loomed above me, 47 stories of steel and ambition, reflecting the faint glow of street lamps just beginning to fade. My breath fogged the windshield, quick and shallow. A distant train horn carried through the morning air, long and mournful. The city was waking, but inside my chest, the clock was already racing. At 7 sharp, the first black SUV pulled up to the curb. Its lights stayed dark, but its presence spoke louder than sirens. 2 more followed, sliding into position with quiet precision. Men and women in dark jackets stepped out, their movements deliberate, practiced, like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Across the street, the revolving doors of the tower spun slowly as early employees filtered inside, unaware of what was about to unfold above their heads. I adjusted in my seat, heart thudding to the rhythm of my wristwatch. 7:10. Another SUV. Agents fanned out near the side entrance, one speaking briefly into a radio, the other pulling a thin file from under his arm. They moved without urgency, but with purpose, the kind of calm that comes from knowing time belongs to you. The lobby's glass doors reflected their shapes like a mirror of inevitability. A pedestrian paused, curious, then moved on quickly, sensing the air had shifted. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale, though I wasn't driving anywhere. 7:15. My watch ticked audibly in the silence of the car, each second a hammer. Then I saw him. Douglas's silver sedan slid into the executive lot with the same confidence he carried into every room. He stepped out in a pressed suit, files under one arm, his eyes fixed on the elevator. Banks inside. He didn't look left or right. To him, it was just another Monday, another morning to stride through glass doors and command a room. He never saw the agents move. He never felt the air tighten around him. But I did. Through the windshield, I caught the scene in fragments. The flicker of lobby lights as security pedestals chimed, the shuffle of agents stepping forward, the sudden stillness of passers-by sensing a story being written in real time. The soundscape held layers, the hiss of the city's HVAC vents, the distant brakes of a bus, the soft chime of the tower's lobby system greeting employees with programmed cheer. But all of it was backdrop to one truth. The hour had come. I stayed still, invisible behind glass, watching as the men and women in dark jackets gathered near the revolving doors. Douglas adjusted his cuff, checked his watch, and pushed forward. The moment stretched, fragile as spun glass. Then the rhythm broke. Agents closed in. Words were spoken too softly for me to hear, but the posture, the sudden stop, the widening of his stance, it told me enough. My watch clicked to 7:16. Monday had arrived. I exhaled, a long release I hadn't realized I'd been holding since Saturday's call. No gloating rose in me, no triumph. only the heavy recognition that justice was no longer in my hands. It had shifted to theirs, measured in evidence bags, signed warrants, and sealed protocols. Eleanor's voice echoed in my memory. Protect the innocent, even from your own. I stayed parked until the scene settled into routine, until the lobby swallowed them all, until the building became again just another tower in a city of towers. Then I started the car, pulled into the slow morning traffic, and let the weight of the day press itself into me. Monday was here, and it would not be denied. Douglas's silver BMW glided into the executive parking lot at exactly 7:15, its engine purring with the same smooth arrogance that had carried him through every boardroom for the past decade. The winter sun caught the polished hood as he stepped out, straightening the line of his tailored coat and pulling a leather folio close under his arm. His stride was confident, unhurried, the gait of a man who believed every door in this glass tower would open at his approach. He adjusted his cufflinks with the flick of a wrist and headed toward the revolving doors, unaware that the air around him was already charged with a different purpose. Inside the lobby, Agent Sofia Ramirez had positioned herself near the security pedestals. Her posture was calm but resolute, her badge already in hand. She stepped forward the moment Douglas crossed the threshold. "Douglas Grant, you are under arrest for federal securities fraud," she said, her voice even but carrying across the marble floor. The words seemed to strike the glass walls themselves, echoing through the lobby like a bell tolling the hour. Agents converged smoothly, their movements rehearsed and efficient. Douglas froze, his confident stride faltering as if the ground itself had shifted. The folio in his hand slipped slightly before he tightened his grip. "This is a mistake," he snapped, his voice breaking around the edges of disbelief. "Call my lawyer. Do you know who I am?" Agent Ramirez ignored the protest, her tone steady as she recited his rights. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in federal court." Her hand gestured subtly, and the cuffs clicked shut around his wrists, with a sound louder than the morning traffic outside. It was not theatrical, not excessive, just procedure. But in that sound lay the collapse of everything he thought untouchable. Around the perimeter, employees had begun to gather. The early risers, badges in hand, stood rooted to the marble as whispers darted through the group like sparks. Mia Torres, one of the longest-serving staff members, pressed her palm to her mouth. Her voice slipped out in a whisper that carried despite herself. "Where's Mr. Columbus?" The question hung in the air, piercing the silence left in Douglas's wake. The agents did not answer, but their presence filled the space with certainty. Outside, media vans skidded to curbs with squeals of brakes. Doors slammed, reporters hurried, and tripod legs snapped open against concrete. Camera shutters began clicking in bursts, capturing reflections of flashing lights against the glass facade. The building that once gleamed with pride now mirrored the spectacle of accountability. Each flash was a record, each angle a slice of truth too stark to be denied. Douglas tried to twist his shoulders, but the agent's grip was firm, guiding him toward the waiting SUV. His voice rose again, brittle and panicked. "This is my company. You can't do this here." But the radios crackled with steady updates, the language of order overtaking the chaos of his protest. "Grant FinTech premises secured," one agent reported, his voice clipped, professional, final. Columbus sat in his car across the street, watching the reflection more than the scene itself. The cuffs, the cameras, the gathering crowd. They all shimmered on the glass facade like a story being written by light and shadow. His breath came slowly, not triumphant, not eager. It felt like air leaving a body, long held and finally released. No victory lap rose in him, only the deep gravity of inevitability. As Douglas was escorted into the waiting vehicle, employees pressed closer to the lobby windows. Some lifted phones, others simply stared, their faces caught between shock and recognition. A few turned away, unwilling to watch. Mia lingered, her whisper repeating under her breath, "Where's Mr. Columbus?" as if the absence of the father weighed heavier than the fall of the sun. The SUV doors shut with a muted thud. The convoy of black vehicles pulled away from the curb, escorted by flashing lights that painted the glass tower in red and blue. Reporters shouted questions, cameras rolled, and the city moved around the scene like a river splitting around a stone. Columbus started his car, merging into the slow current of morning traffic. He did not look back at the tower, at the flashing lights, or at the reflection of his son being driven away. He kept his eyes forward, hands steady on the wheel. Justice had begun its work, and his part was done. The soundscape of the city filled in the silence, the staccato of shutters, the clipped cadence of radios, the echo of footsteps on marble, and beneath it all, the faint hum of a father's resolve, steady as the road unfolding ahead. The federal courthouse carried a solemn weight that pressed against the ribs the minute we stepped through security. Polished wood paneling swallowed sound, flags stood immovable, and the great seal on the wall watched like an unblinking eye. Eleanor sat beside me on the hard pew in a navy dress she'd worn to happier ceremonies, clutching a folded tissue so tight the paper had softened at the edges. The gallery murmured, then settled. When the clerk called our case, the room shifted into a stillness that felt like weather. Douglas entered with the marshals, not in a suit, but in an orange jumpsuit, his wrists free for the moment, his eyes scanning the room for an exit that did not exist. Jury selection had come and gone with clinical questions and curt nods. Now the trial began in the measured cadence of forms and oaths. The prosecutor outlined the government's story, a pattern of inflated margins, minimized debt, and investor materials out of sync with publicly filed numbers. She spoke without heat, building a scaffold from dates, emails, and spreadsheets. The defense sketched their version: a visionary CEO moving fast in a turbulent market, a father fired and bitter, looking to reclaim relevance by turning private disagreements into federal crimes. When the clerk swore me in, I walked to the witness stand as if stepping onto a cold bridge, sound structure underfoot, wind at my back, and a drop I preferred not to look over. The prosecutor began with the drawer. I described the stuck wood, the sudden give, the papers fanning across the carpet. I named the documents: internal decks that sold a future, public filings that recorded a present. Side by side, they told two different stories. She put the exhibits on the screen. The 10Q with $2.3 million in profit flickered first, line items crisp, audit notes at the bottom like fine print in a prayer book. Then the investor deck, $3.4 million presented as achieved, not projected. Costs displaced behind euphemisms. Debt to equity framed as flexible leverage. She asked what a reasonable investor would understand from those pages. I answered in the simplest language I knew. If you show someone a house with the best rooms lit and the broken ones walled off, you are selling a mirage. These materials hid risk, overstated return, and pulled money toward a picture that was not true. She walked me through the marginalia. Emphasize Q4 trajectory. Minimize debt equity. Focus on projected revenue, not current reality. I explained why those notes mattered. They direct attention away from facts to a story engineered for appetite. In finance, attention is currency and narrative is leverage. Misuse either, and you are not persuading. You are deceiving. She asked about my experience. I recounted decades of audits, market crises, and the rule I'd repeated to Douglas 100 times. If you would tell it to your grandmother and a federal judge the same way, it's honest. I said I could not read those materials aloud to either without changing my voice. The defense rose with an almost conversational smile. We returned to the drawer, but now it was a dramatic prop for a motivation tale. He pressed the idea of a resentful father. You were terminated publicly, correct? You were humiliated. You packed your office with hurt feelings. He wanted a story about revenge because revenge sells better than math. I kept my answers short. Yes, I was terminated. Yes, it hurt. No, that did not change the numbers. He suggested I cherry-picked exhibits and misunderstood aspirational statements common to growth companies. He emphasized that forward-looking language appears everywhere in corporate America. I agreed that hope is legal. I disagreed that calling today's hope tomorrow's fact is legal. He tried to trap me in technicals. When he asked if I personally authored any investor deck, the answer was no. When he asked if I was still on payroll when those emails went out, the answer was no. He wanted distance to make doubt. The jury watched the screens, not our faces. The prosecution returned with anchors. Chain of custody first. Agent Sofia Ramirez took the stand and mapped the evidence from my briefcase to sealed bags, to locked storage to forensic imaging. She answered quietly, letting the process do the talking. Then came the servers. A forensic analyst demonstrated how the decks on screen matched files seized from Grant FinTech machines, time-stamped and unaltered, with draft histories that tracked edits and comments across users. Emails appeared with subject lines that felt like ordinary business until the attachments opened. The very slides we had seen, sent to investor prospects with persuasive flourishes and calendar invites. The courtroom's hum tightened. It is one thing to accuse, it is another to lay the path tile by tile. When Douglas took the stand, the defense framed him as a fast-moving builder facing headwinds. He spoke about market velocity, competitive pressure, and the need to keep belief alive. He said the numbers reflected run rate and momentum. He described the debt as strategic, the margins as normalized, the wording as industry standard. He did not once name the gap between filings and decks. On cross, the prosecutor kept to yes or no. Did you approve this deck? Yes. Did you know the 10Q showed $2.3 million? Yes. Did this slide display $3.4 million as achieved? He hesitated, searching for a category to put the truth in. The screen showed the word profit without qualifiers. He said the slide represented anticipated close. The prosecutor asked where the word anticipated appeared. Silence is a sound in a courtroom. It gathers. It weighs. Eleanor's hand rested on the pew back in front of her, white at the knuckles. I could feel, without turning, how she tried to hold us both steady. The son defended by professionals, the husband defended by facts. When the government rested, the defense returned to motive like a lost hiker circling the same tree. They said I wanted my car keys back. They suggested that family pride, not fiduciary duty, drove me. But their exhibits were adjectives and inferences. Ours were artifacts and ledgers. The judge's rulings kept the edges clean. Forward-looking puffery was one thing. Contradicting a public filing in solicitations was another. Closing arguments placed the last stones. The prosecutor spoke in plain sentences. You do not have to be a banker to know the difference between what is and what is wished for. The evidence shows a pattern, not a mistake. She thanked the jury for their attention and sat down with the calm of someone who trusts gravity. The defense asked the jury to see ambiguity, to see a father's hurt and a CEO's optimism. He pointed at me and called me old school. I took no offense. Old school still builds bridges that stand. The judge's instructions were slow and exact. The foreperson received the folder and the 12 disappeared. The courtroom relaxed into the low murmur of stale coffee and waiting. Eleanor and I did not speak. Waiting is a craft, and we had practiced it across decades. I thought about a kitchen table in 2008, a withdrawal slip, a promise scribbled on the margin of a business plan. I thought about the conference room where my son had replaced thanks with theater. I thought about the drawer, the camera bubble on the ceiling, the click of a phone as I captured the pages because truth does not mind a photograph. 3 hours later, the deputy called us back. The jury filed in, faces unreadable. The clerk's monotone filled the room. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson stood with the kind of stillness that turns a room into a bell. We have. On count 1, securities fraud, how do you find? Guilty. The word landed with a clean edge. On count 2, conspiracy to commit securities fraud. Guilty. On count 3, wire fraud. Guilty. Each repetition pressed the air thinner. Douglas's shoulders sagged in increments that only a father would notice. The marshals did not move. Procedure gives even endings their order. The judge thanked the jury and set a date for sentencing. Papers shuffled. The seal on the wall did not blink. Eleanor's hand found my forearm like a life ring, not to keep from sinking, but to keep from floating away. Reporters would write that justice was done, that a whistleblower father upheld the market's promise. The truth felt stranger and heavier. Wins can feel like funerals too. Somewhere inside, the relief was the shape of a boy who once asked me how compound interest worked, marveling when the numbers grew as if they were seeds. Somewhere inside the verdict was the echo of a graduation day photo on my office shelf, a suit too big for a young man and a grin that made the future look easy. We stood when the judge left, then did what people do after a storm: gather coats, find exits, say little. In the aisle, Mia Torres touched my sleeve and whispered, "I'm sorry. Thank you." 2 honest sentences, the kind that help a man keep walking. Outside, cameras waited, but I kept my eyes on the courthouse steps and the ordinary traffic beyond them. Justice had stuck to the facts and spoken in a clear voice. It had also taken a pound of flesh no scale could weigh. I did not gloat. I did not mourn. I put one foot on the next step and felt the stone answer back, solid and cold, as it should be. The sentencing hearing moved with the same sober cadence as the trial, but the words carried iron. The judge read from the order, each clause a hinge closing. Douglas Grant is committed to the custody of the Bureau of Prisons for a term of 7 years. He shall pay restitution in the amount of $2.3 million to identified victims, jointly and severally as applicable. Forfeiture is ordered as outlined in the schedule attached. He is permanently barred from serving as a director or officer of any public company. The gavel rapped once. Paper rustled like dry leaves. Outside the courtroom, reporters called out for statements that would not help anyone now. Justice, not vengeance, I said, because it was the only true sentence left. Marshals guided Douglas through a side door. Eleanor stood beside me, spine straight, eyes rimmed red, holding her purse like a small anchor. The clerk passed copies of the judgment, dates, docket numbers, restitution schedules, forfeiture lists, the accounting of a fall. Somewhere down the hall, a latch clicked, an institutional door closing with the finality of poured concrete. The fallout arrived as lists and trucks. A red sold rider appeared on the brass-posted sign outside Douglas's mansion. Movers taped cardboard boxes in echoing rooms where art once hung. The wine cellar emptied into inventory spreadsheets. 2 cars left on flatbeds, leather soft seats hidden under gray tarps. Brokerage houses executed court orders. Portfolio positions unwound into cash, then transferred into a victim's trust the court established. The trust's letterhead carried a promise in plain type: distribution according to loss. Inside Grant FinTech, the CEO office turned museum quiet. A framed mission statement leaned against a wall, glass, removed for safety. Compliance officers and court-appointed monitors pulled files, mirrored drives, and built new procedures in fluorescent light. The corner chair where Douglas used to rehearse pitches sat empty, a shape made of leather and memory. Mia Torres, steady as a metronome, coordinated with the interim board, her voice low, notes precise. No one cheered. People worked because payroll and promises still needed keeping. The city widened the lens. The Tribune ran a banner headline: Grant FinTech Scandal, CEO Sentenced, Restitution Ordered. Trade blogs posted timelines. Commentators dissected the gap between growth talk and filed reality. Investor forums shared the SEC's press statement alongside screenshots of the decks the jury had seen. At a neighborhood coffee shop, two analysts in rolled-up sleeves argued about leverage, while a retiree traced the restitution number with her finger and nodded once, satisfied not by the amount, but by the acknowledgement. At home, the consequences threaded into ordinary hours. Our daughter-in-law filed for divorce, the papers arriving in a stiff manila envelope that thumped against the mail slot like a tired fist. The grandchildren stopped calling for a while. Confusion needs quiet to untangle. Eleanor placed their school photos along the mantel, dusted them more than necessary, and left space for a day when visits would be simple again. Nights, the house settled. The front door latch clicked as the furnace cycled. Sleep came in shorter pieces. Grief and relief took turns at the foot of our bed. I kept returning to the sentence I'd given the cameras. Justice, not vengeance. It had to mean something on Tuesdays and Thursdays, not just on courthouse steps. So I made myself small rituals. I read the court order once, not 50 times. I walked the block with Eleanor after dinner. I kept my phone face down when headlines pinged. When people asked, I explained the difference between accountability and retribution. Accountability repairs a public ledger. Retribution feeds a private hunger that never ends. We chose the former because markets and families need ledgers, not flames. In the weeks that followed, envelopes began to arrive from the victim's trust. First notices, then checks. Some were modest, some substantial, each accompanied by a page that translated legal arithmetic into human relief. One retiree wrote a note in looping cursive on a card with a lighthouse on the front. "Thank you for telling the truth in time." Another emailed Mia, then forwarded a copy to the interim board. "We will do business with you again if your actions keep looking like this." No one pretended restitution restored everything. It restored something measurable: standing. The industry did its part. Panels discussed disclosure with renewed attention. Younger founders asked better questions during office hours. Momentum slid a little lower in the pitch deck vocabulary, while controls moved up a line. A firm that once chased, Sizzle assigned a veteran to read footnotes aloud in meetings. Inside Grant FinTech, training sessions filled conference rooms where, last year, only projections had drawn crowds. People learned how to say, "We don't know yet," without flinching. Uncertainty re-entered the building like a long-exiled relative who carried tools. On a quiet Saturday, I drove past the mansion one last time. The windows wore paper shades the staging company favored, all the personality stripped so buyers could imagine their own stories. The lawn held faint tracks from dollies and boots. Farther north, at the office tower, a new nameplate waited on the door: Interim Chief Compliance Officer. Mia's signature appeared under a memo titled Temporary Reporting Protocol. I stood in the lobby for a minute and listened to the HVAC hum and the faint echo of an elevator car arriving. Work continued. That mattered. The personal wreckage cannot be prettied up. A son will serve 7 years in federal custody. A family will write birthdays on calendars and mark them from a distance. A company will rebuild its reputation one reconciled line at a time. Articles will live online longer than any of us. Yet when the front door latch clicked that night and Eleanor set 2 cups on the table, we sat without bitterness. We had done what the moment demanded. Justice, not vengeance. The sentence carried weight. It also created room for investors to breathe, for employees to steady, for a future that could tell the truth and still sell. String lights zigzagged between the oaks, casting soft constellations across the lawn as neighbors and a few colleagues found their seats at the patio tables. Gordon Hale lifted his glass, the last sunlight sliding off the rim like a quiet blessing. To standing up when sitting down would have been easier, he said, to telling the truth in a way that protects the future, even when it breaks your heart in the present. No speech beyond that, just gratitude that integrity still changes outcomes. He nodded once and let the evening breathe. Eleanor moved among the guests with her steady grace, topping off tea, easing shy people into conversation, adjusting a chair so it caught the breeze. When the first wave of thanks softened into ordinary talk, she came to my side and rested a hand on my forearm. "You did the right thing when it cost the most," she said, not as praise but as a fact she meant to plant in the soil. It will keep growing where people can see it. Lemon peel and cut basil drifted up from the pitcher she set down. The words landed like a handrail on a staircase I had climbed in the dark. Mia Torres slipped in after closing the office, hair tied back, a notebook still tucked under her arm out of habit. She offered a brief smile and an update that sounded like recovery rather than victory. "Training sessions are full," she said. "People are asking real questions. We slowed the next product release so controls match claims. The interim board backed it." She did not linger on triumph. She named work done and work ahead, then took a seat and a square of Eleanor's cornbread as if it were a promise kept. Dusk thickened and the backyard found its rhythm. A neighbor tuned a guitar without fuss and wandered into a run of familiar songs. Summer insects took up their own accompaniment, a thin thread of sound against the soft murmur of conversation. Laughter rose and faded without edges. I felt the pull to turn the evening into a post-mortem of everything that had gone wrong, to replay the boardroom and the marble floors and the drawer that stuck. But the impulse passed. The facts had been told where they belonged. Tonight, we would practice the habits that keep people from hardening, listening, refilling, cleaning up together. When the moment opened, I said a few words. "Love shows up," I said. "Respect is a verb. When truth knocks, I will open the door." No one clapped, which felt right. People nodded and returned to the work of being present. Gordon refilled Eleanor's glass with tonic and lime and asked about the tomatoes. A neighbor traded seedling tips for a tray of cookies she had brought. Small commerce, the kind that stitches a block together, moved from hand to hand without a receipt. Later, while the moon cleared a branch and hung over the garage like a watchful coin, I walked inside to fetch more napkins and paused at the office shelf. The framed copy of the 2008 loan note sat beside a photo of Douglas at 8, elbows scuffed, holding a fishing pole nearly as long as he was tall. Both are true, I told myself. Both are past. The note remembered the night we drained our savings to keep a dream breathing. The photo remembered a boy who laughed with his whole chest and believed I could fix anything. I left the napkins on the desk for a moment and let the two frames sit in my field of vision until they settled into place as part of the same story. Back outside, the air had cooled and brightened. Someone lit the small fire bowl, and the flame answered with a modest column of warmth. The party thinned the way good gatherings do. Not with a dramatic exit, but with a gentle taper as babysitters and bedtimes called people home. Those who remained pulled their chairs closer. Eleanor leaned into me, shoulder to shoulder, the way she did decades ago at high school games when the wind came in off the plains. She is a woman who understands weather. She knows when to brace and when to let the gust pass through. When the last guests left, Gordon lingered at the gate. "You carried this with care," he said. "Remember to put it down sometimes." He was no longer talking about the case. He meant the habit of holding everything too tightly. I promised to try and meant it. We stacked plates, doused the fire, and clicked off the string lights one loop at a time until the yard returned to its ordinary dark. The grass kept the imprint of chairs for a few minutes, then smoothed itself in the breeze as if to say that weight never stays where it lands. Inside, the house settled. Eleanor set 2 clean glasses on a towel and wiped the counter with the contentment of a task completed. We stood listening to the night through the screen door. Somewhere on the next block, a train drew a long note across the air and let it fade. The sound carried the same plain mercy as a steady heartbeat after a hard sprint. I turned off the kitchen light and we climbed the stairs. At the landing, I looked once toward the office door, then kept going. The shelf would be there tomorrow, and the frames would still hold what they held, but they would not ask for more than they already had. Tomorrow would arrive without my help. Tonight had done its work. We had chosen company over bitterness, duty over noise, and the kind of sentences that build rather than burn. In the bedroom, the curtain lifted and fell with the breeze. The house breathed. So did we. If this story struck a chord with you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us where you're watching from and whether you've ever faced that painful crossroads between telling the truth and keeping family peace. What boundary did you set that ultimately protected your dignity, even when it cost you dearly? Your stories help remind others that they are not alone, and that courage shared is courage multiplied. We built this channel to be a place where hard choices, family betrayal, and justice can be spoken aloud without shame. So join the conversation and let your voice add strength to the community. And if you're ready for another unforgettable journey, stay tuned. Next up is a holiday season story where an inheritance dinner becomes a test of character, and the quietest person at the table changes everything. Tap the box on the left when it appears.